So I am back with Timothy Brainard for part 3 of our beautiful conversations, which I know we're enjoying. So if anyone else does, bonus, right?
Yeah.
Um, and last week we really managed to get into what seems to be your life's work at the moment anyway, what the body keys. And really obviously I've been editing it and watching it since, and so I've been re-listening to it and letting it sink in. And I also, was blessed to be given my body keys by you. I've listened to that recording a number of times, and there's something that always stands out to me every time I listen to it, and it's that you say, that you built this to be not only concise but precise, and you say it with such dignity, and and I really, really get that from you and from your work, that there's a simplicity to it which is vast in its depth, and that's quite rare, to be able to do that, and I really feel like you've done it.
Wow. Thank you.
Thank you. So yeah, I hope that people will start to see that from that video, because you really go into it. We really went into them in depth. And so today I think we're just wanting to go into a few loose ends, and particularly melancholy, because it's such a big subject, and maybe because we share that key. And
Yes.
so it's something that I can't think of ever looking into with anybody, like in terms of any of the books I've read or spiritual teachers I've worked with, or great wise friends I've had. It's something I knew about myself already, and I've discussed maybe in like channeled sessions, that like readings from people and stuff like that, but I can't think of like a book on it, or someone that's really done a lot of work on it. So from that perspective, it feels like something that's exciting to give some space to.
Yeah, I agree with you. My experience has been similar. It's why when I discovered this for myself in like a corner of human design, it really sunk in, and I've been, making a lot of noise about it ever since, because it's totally transformed my experience.
Left off, let's jump into melancholy as a subject, and just what obviously you've been unpacking it for longer, consciously for longer than I have. So I would love to know what you've found, and then I can share my experiences with it as well.
Okay, wonderful. Let's do this then. Let's unpack melancholy a bit. So for those of you who joined us for the last conversation, you learned that melancholy is one of the 7 stuckness patterns that we learn about in the context of the body keys. But what's so interesting about melancholy is that melancholy in and of itself is not a pattern of tension. It's actually a beneficial pattern. It's a very natural effect of being human. And there are certain ones of us humans who have this particular movement playing out more prominently in our experience. So this is what we're excited to look at today. What is melancholy? What does it feel like? And what purpose does it serve ultimately? It's interesting to look at something that I distinctly referred to as a stuckness pattern, and to say that it's not actually a problem. So I want to be clear about what I mean by this. I also want to make something else clear. And Rowan, thank you so much for what you said about the precision and simplicity of this work, because it's so important to me. I feel like a broken record in saying this, but there's a part of building this material that for me has come from a place of wanting to communicate it to literally anyone. In fact, I think often about communicating this sort of information to a child. Would a child understand what we're dealing with here? And for the most part in the body keys, the words that I've chosen and the terminology that I've leaned into, it is basic and simple enough that I think a child would begin to understand it. There are a few exceptions, and this word melancholy is one of them. In fact, I spent weeks really considering whether I wanted to strike the word melancholy and replace it with something like sadness, since it does contain that kind of quality of sadness. And in the end, I decided to keep it because I think there is good learning to be kind of contained within this term, that by keeping the term, we give ourselves the opportunity to look at with a newfound curiosity. So this is one term that I don't want you to like intuitively understand. I want to go into it. And that's what we're going to do today. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. So I'm curious, in your definition of melancholy, is it similar to what you would find in the dictionary, or have you developed your own definition for it?
I've definitely developed my own definition as a result of experience and also the human design kind of awareness around this particular phenomenon.
Cool. Well, let's start with that. Let's hear your definition of it.
Okay, wonderful. So let's start with what it feels like, and then we'll lead into the definition. We touched on this the last time that we spoke, but for those of you who are just joining us now, I think it's worth restating that the feeling of melancholy is this imperceptible sadness. Melancholy is that strange phenomenon when you wake up to meet a fresh new day and the sun is shining and the birds are chirping and the skies are blue, and for some reason you feel off inside. And there's no reason for it. You woke up and you feel this way, and it's disorienting. You know, objectively, you can look out at the world and see that everything is beautiful and fine, even perfect. Yet subjectively, you feel gray. And so it's almost like fog has been lowered over your perception, over the skies of your inner world, and it's really hard to get out of this dull feeling. You know, sometimes it's sad, but even the sadness is like living in London, I would imagine. You know, it's like gray. It's not a rich sadness like Oregon. You know, it's not flushed with life. It's gray, and it kind of feels like not feeling. Melancholy is dullness, a feeling of not feeling. And this is what makes it so uncomfortable. And we like to kind of like squirm out of it. You know, it's very, very uncomfortable to be in that feeling. So we'll pause there. That's what melancholy feels like. And for those of you who are listening and are familiar with this, my guess would be that you're very familiar with this, because those of us who have this playing out in our experience, now this is something really inescapable. So the definition itself. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Rowan. I see.
I was just going to say, do you, in my own understanding of it and looking into it, I have perceived it as a kind of a not wanting to let go of certain things in the past. It definitely feels to be something that is way more related to the past than the future as an energy. Does that feel similar to you?
Yes and no. It's actually fascinating that in human design, we learn that there are very specific gates and channels related to this theme of melancholy, and each gate has a melancholic theme. And so there are melancholies connected to the past, and there are melancholies connected to the future, and there are melancholies connected to the present, and there are melancholies connected to behavior.
Okay.
So yeah, it's actually a fairly deep study in and of itself. Okay. Yeah, and as a result of your design, you will experience, you know, to a greater or lesser degree, certain ones of those and not others.
Right. Okay.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, that is.
Yeah. Maybe there's a way. I have like a graphic that was gifted to me a long time ago that actually details each of the gates of melancholy, and maybe there's a way that we can offer this as a download or something. I'll see what I can do about that.
Absolutely. I think that would
be really neat for people to be able to kind of contemplate that, including you.
Yes, let's do that. Definitely. Okay. Definitely. Yeah, I guess I had usually thought of it as a kind of a wistfulness towards, like emotionally, internally, a wistfulness towards something that was, and in a way an inability to shake it free and allow what is to be rich enough, what is present to be rich enough to feed you. And there's this kind of like, oh, but you know, like I love all things from the past. I love, you know, my husband always says you were born 100 years too late. Like, you know, I have this wistfulness, this melancholy relationship towards like horse and cart and like, you know, candles, there's lighting and like just these things that we don't do anymore in modern culture. But like, to me, they're deeply kind of romantic. And I have this, I feel like a relationship of melancholy with, you know, like, I mean, I'm sure it's past lives, you know, that were rich and beautiful because of those things. And now when I come across them, it's like there's this kind of, you know, wanting of that, missing of it.
It's very familiar to me what you're describing. And actually what I recognize in your description is that your relationship to melancholy is ideal. And we're going to discuss this, the stuckness and the ideal, right? So there's a way that we can get tensed around this, and there's a way that we can kind of allow it. When you allow melancholy, it sounds a lot like what you've just described. There's this kind of, you said romantic. It's a brilliant term here. There's a romantic quality to it, right? There is depth and dimension and beauty inherent to this particular movement, but we need to allow the movement to be that in order to access that depth. Otherwise, we end up on the surface with that grayness that I'm describing. And I'm describing that because for most people without awareness, their relationship to melancholy is not in the depths of its richness, but instead on the surface of its dullness, which is what feels unavoidable, inescapable, and like an inner paralysis.
Yes. Yeah.
So your wistfulness is actually the ideal. That's what we're aiming for, actually.
Oh, well, that's good.
Yeah, you've accidentally nailed it. No, we're gonna look more deeply at that in a moment. Thank you so much for sharing that. Is there anything else you'd like to kind of uncover before we move on?
Well, in the Enneagram, I have always connected that kind of melancholy side to, you know, I'm your mirror. I'm a 2 with a 1 wing. And so my 1 disintegrates to 4. And the 4 is that tragic romantic, you know, always looking for the love that's out there, kind of out of reach and kind of perfect. And so I've always really connected my melancholy to that. It has had a romantic kind of like, oh, that beautiful, perfect love that never even existed anyway, kind of thing. That's like completely out of reach, and then not being able to receive and connect properly to the present and what is, because of this kind of wistfulness and idealization, really, of the past through melancholy, through a melancholic relationship with it.
Yeah, that's right. And that is not the end of the story. When I say that is the ideal, that is the ideal of the melancholic movement, but it's not the end. So that's another thing we want to look at, is the end that feeling serves. Because the idea here is that melancholy serves a very specific purpose. And this is what we're really hoping to unveil in this conversation.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. We want to take it to its gift.
Yes, correct. That's exactly right. So let's define it then.
Yeah.
And we're going to define it within the context of human design, right? And what I've learned as a result of this study, which is that melancholy is actually a biochemical movement. It's something that's happening within the body itself. It's physiological in nature. It's not mental in nature. It's physical. And as a chemical movement, you can think of it almost like the pulse of the waves of the ocean. It's something very similar to emotion or hormones, where there's an effect on the body that you do not have conscious control over, right? And this effect is referred in human design, it's referred to as the pulse of mutation, the pulse of individuality, or the pulse of mutation. It's interesting because the individual in human design is a mutative element. What does this mean? It means that in the process of evolution, there's always going to be a kink in the gears. There's always going to be some variable that arrives seemingly out of nowhere that forces all of your strategies and processes, which have been working for all this time, to rediscover themselves anew, to adapt. And it's that mutative element that forces a functioning system to mature, to evolve, to change form. So individuals, people like you and I, anyone who has this as a prominent aspect of their design, they're built to have impact. But their impact is always going to be a transformative impact, which is simultaneously beautiful and destructive. because the old has to die off. The snake has to shed its skin in order for the new to be found. And the old patterns have to be stripped, reevaluated, and adapted in order to accommodate the new variable. So this pulse, this chemical movement that flows through people like you and I, this is by design. And it's actually an aspect of the evolution of the individual, yourself, the collective, human consciousness. It's all a contributing factor to evolution and transformation. It's very powerful stuff, very impactful.
Wow, that's very deep.
Quite, but it's a pulse. It's on again, off again. So we think about it this way.
Yeah, and I feel that. I mean, I think we've discussed before, like feeling like a storm in people's lives sometimes, like that kind of impulsive change, like that is disruptive, and here we are at this point in history, kind of at the pinnacle of all of that, really, with the new world, like the rays kind of really, really trying to break through, but the old world is holding on for dear life, and the destruction is getting more violent, but
yeah, you can only resist transformation for so long,
right,
before you either die off or adapt.
Yeah.
So that's a part of what's playing out here. And the thing is, it's playing out through each of us as individuals. And there's something really special about this. The fact that each one of us carries this mutative potential within our bodies, within our individual stories. It means that anywhere we go, we have impact. And the question comes to really, it's one of quality. What is the quality of that impact? Are we going to allow ourselves to elevate the space and the world around us? Are we going to step up into our own story? Or are we going to allow the force of that to crush us? And this is what happens with melancholy. Melancholy is fascinating because it serves this mutative process. It's built into us as an aspect of this. It's an on again, off again pulse, and sometimes we feel it and sometimes we don't, okay? When we feel it, it can feel fairly overwhelming, especially when we don't understand what's happening or what to do with it. And so what tends to happen for most of us without awareness of this mechanism is that we argue with the feeling. You wake up in the morning and you feel this way, and you get to work on it. You start to wrap all of these mental, logical, intellectual reasons around why you feel that way. This is the question. Why do I feel this way? And so you blame either yourself or the world outside of you for causing the feeling, when in fact the feeling is a chemical movement within your body that you have no control over. There is no reason outside of you. The problem is that when we argue with it, we lock it. And if we think about this thing as a pulse or as a wave, it's moving. The switch is turning on, turning off, turning on, turning off. The wave is moving up and down. You feel melancholic, you don't. It's a movement. And the beauty of a movement is that if you wait, it's going to change. It's moving through the medium of time. Give it enough time, open to it and give it enough time, and it will continue to move, and it will deliver something if you can allow it to move. But when you argue with it, anytime that we argue with that feeling and we try to make sense of it, right? When we blame ourselves for having done something wrong or not having done something enough, or we blame the world outside of us for being too ... fill in the blanks, we lock that movement so it can't deliver what it's here to deliver. And this is the stuckness pattern. It's when we argue with it that it becomes stuck.
Hold on a second for that noise. So I think that is absolutely fascinating, because if you think of what blame actually is, blame takes the responsibility and puts it outside of yourself. So in doing that, what you're actually doing, just my translation of what you just said, is you're taking your power and you're suddenly giving it away. So all of a sudden that's the big issue with blame. Anytime you blame somebody, you're handing them your power on a silver platter, because if it's their fault, there's nothing you can do about it. Carry on with that thought, then you're a victim. And
correct.
None of us ever want to be a victim. And that, for me, realizing that was, the key element in blame was that I was literally handing someone my power on a silver platter. That made me furious because the person I was blaming, I was already angry with, and that I would then give my power to them. I went into a rage, and that was the first time in my personal history that I actually learned how to move through and give away, actually express anger and not hold on to it, because I realized I always held on to it because I wanted to be able to blame the person that had wronged me. But when I realized that meant I was giving them my power, I was like, oh, forget it. Get rid of the anger, no problem, So it was a very pivotal understanding for me in my own emotional intelligence, and now I'm watching, as you talk about this wave, it's like the minute you blame, you're stepped out of your power. And so you're gone, basically, stepped out of the room.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's how it feels.
Yeah.
Blame is always going to be that factor that locks the movement, that disallows the movement to continue. And there's a kind of a flip side to this coin, which is self-blame. And it's a fascinating side to consider, basically, because so much of this process is individual. It's personal. Each of these patterns plays out in a particular dimension of experience, whether it's emotional or mental or relational. This one is personal. And I think for a lot of us who are built this way, we are very self-focused. And so we have learned how to take responsibility for ourselves and our actions and our feelings and our perspectives. But that same giving away of power, that can be self-directed in a way that basically puts you at war with yourself. And I think this is what a lot of people like us tend to be more likely to fall prey to. And something like blame can blossom into self-criticism. And these can be really tight knots to get free of when you're tussling with yourself and you feel a victim of yourself.
Yeah.
And so this can become really sticky stuff.
And I think with the self-blame, it really has a very short life because it kind of, we tend to numb it with guilt, right?
Absolutely.
And then the guilt turns to resentment, which turns to self-hate. And it's
it becomes dark.
Yeah.
Yeah, it becomes dark. And this is where melancholy will be diagnosed. So imagine that you have a movement that wants to deliver something, but you've blocked it, and you're arguing, and you're hard at work, and you're working on it, and you're a conscious person.
Yeah.
And you're working so hard, and the harder you work, the tighter that knot gets, and the more you try to make yourself responsible for this feeling, which, by the way, is neutral, has no reason, but you're wrapping reasons around it, and you're making yourself wrong, and you're moving into all of these areas that Rowan just described. What happens is that what was a movement gets stuck for long enough that melancholy becomes chronic, and we call that depression.
Right.
Melancholy is depression, and anyone who is highly individual in their human design, anyone who has this as a prominent aspect of their body keys profile, is very likely the sort of person who has been either externally diagnosed or self-diagnosed as depressive. And the remarkable thing is that many people like us are medicating this away.
Yes.
We're numbing out.
Yes.
Yeah, antidepressants and all of these things. So. And
the numbness reminds me of Richard Rudd's discussion of the first gene key. The first gene key, the shadow is dullness, I think, but which he talks about as a numbness.
Yes.
And that numbness really is a feeling, and it's a feeling of like, whoa, I can't feel very much, but that's the feeling.
That's right.
And he talks about really just staying with that and being okay with it. And it sounds like it's really very similar here with the melancholy, is just to stay with that numbness it brings and ride the wave.
Yes. In the human design chart, the first gate, which is equivalent to the first gene key, is right at the very heart of this whole process. Yeah. Yes. So this is a really ideal archetype to kind of hold the narrative that we're exploring today.
Yeah.
Yes. So let's dig a little deeper, because we still haven't arrived at the purpose. We know how it feels. We have an idea of how it, functions, right? We see that it's a biochemical movement. The home of this is in the body, and we don't have control over it. We know better by now not like than to argue with it. We know not to argue with it. So what's left? What's left is to release ourselves to that feeling like you just described. And when we do this, melancholy in every case delivers something beautiful, because melancholy serves the creative process. Here's what's actually happening. And I know you're aware of this now, Rowan, but I want everyone else to hear this. So I'm just going to share it with them the same way I shared it with you.
Please.
Melancholy is a physical indication that some part of your inner being has gone out to mine the depths of possibility for something new. Really, really like rewind and listen to that again if you need to. Some part of you is hard at work, mining the infinite depths of possibility for something fresh and original and new. Melancholy is an aspect of a birthing process. It's a part of a birthing process. And that feeling, that uncomfortable feeling, is like birth pangs. It's the labor pains prior to delivery. And in every case, if we can allow this movement to complete itself, melancholy will deliver some form of insight, some deep personal breakthrough, some new form of creative expression. And when it does, it's not just delivering something creative, it's delivering something ultimately creative, because it's bringing something that has never before existed to life through you. And this thing is truly original in every case. And when it comes to life, it's the sort of thing that can only have its life through you. Understand, each one of us is a unique medium. And whatever moves through us is changed by virtue of moving through us. So when we speak to originality, this is about the truest and most powerful possible expression of who you are. Yeah. That's what melancholy is doing. Melancholy is actually a remarkably positive physical signal. Oh man, does that turn it on its head or what?
I mean, it's so beautiful, and I just feel like it's so relevant to our times, you know. And I mean, like you said, it's an depression and antidepressants is a epidemic.
It is
in our modern world, literally.
Yes.
And to realize, and we all know that people, you know, when they get on that, it dulls them. You know, it dulls that creative impulse. And that's why people want to get off it. They're like, okay, I kind of feel better, but I feel dull, you know, so it's like not that better.
I don't hurt, but now I feel nothing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so you have thousands, millions, I don't know, a lot of powerful individuals with a purpose to serve, by the way.
Yes.
You know? All of whom are medicating away their access to their greatest potential, their access to creative potential. Yeah. It's the saddest story in the world.
Yeah,
honestly.
It really is.
When I met it, it felt so modern, it felt so familiar, and it felt so sad, demoralizing even. Yeah. Until I realized that, hey, I can learn about this and start sharing this, because there are a lot of people who are desperate to find that alternative. We know, those of us who have this moving as an aspect of who we are, we know it's not an illness. We know it's not a disease. We know it's something central to who we are, but we haven't known what to do with it. And this single enormous leap in awareness that takes that feeling of melancholy from the place of like, oh, I hate this, to the place of, oh, something's happening. Oh my gosh, the energy in that, the power in that is it's an exponential gap that you've, you know, traversed.
Yeah. For some reason, it just reminds me of compost. It's like, you know, you put everything in the compost and it's just decomposing. It's sitting there and then it looks worse and worse, and it, you know, goes through these stages. And then all of a sudden you put it on the garden and it grows like the most amazing.
Yeah.
So it feels like it's our personal composting process, that melancholy is that kind of composting moment when you are reviewing the past and you are sad that that's not the way. And then you're like, okay, but let's find a new beautiful way, you know. And that plumbing of the depths that the melancholy paves the way for, right? I mean, a very deep space when you're really there. It's like the current world doesn't touch you that much. You're kind of like somewhere else quite deep.
Yeah,
And I would imagine that's kind of where you're stepping into more of the imaginal and the liminal spaces kind of in
absolutely.
between.
Absolutely, yes. You're
Yeah.
beyond the present. That's how I experience it. Even if it's kind of like a poetic remembering of the past, it's a remembering of the
Yes.
past. It's not as if you're objectively viewing something that happened. You're re-engaging and restoring that past. You're engaged in a process that is imaginal, as you just said, and it's beautiful to consider it this way because there's poetry built into this. And I can tell you that every good poem and song, any form of creative expression I've ever arrived at came by means of this process.
Yeah.
It used to be something I would access intentionally. I didn't know what I was doing, but when I lived in Arizona many years ago, nearly 10 years ago now, I would come home from a long day of work and I'd walk into my room after a shower and I would feel sad and alone and lonely. And I knew to use this. I knew that if I sat on my bed with the computer on my lap and I just sat there staring at a white screen for long enough, at some point that deep discomfort, I hated it, by the way. I hated it, but I sat with it. And the reason I sat with it is because I knew at a certain point, I would turn my head to look out the window and the trees would have more color than they did a second ago. And the birds would sound different and the lighting would change. And all of a sudden there would be this like awareness that would arise in me and it would feel beautiful. And all of a sudden it was like somehow I had sunk into the very depths of everything and opened to the greater story. And then a poem would emerge. And the poem would carry with it, by the way, all those themes of sadness and longing and feeling alone, but it would also have, woven throughout this optimism. Because in every case, something is being brought to life. In every case, the change is positive. Transformation, evolution, it's always on a positive trajectory. So it's just such like a yummy thing that's playing out here that we have been so unaware of and so at war with. My goodness, the pattern of stuckness here, that melancholic stuckness, it's so familiar. But what the body keys is really kind of inviting us to discover is precisely how never to experience it as tension again. We get to take a breath and lean into this. And we do this by reconnecting to a sense of feeling in that moment. Soundscape, as we learned, is the body key that helps us to do this. Ultimately, what we're doing is we're opening ourselves to that deep inner space of silence. And we're regaining a sense of feeling. We're doing that paradoxically through sound. Sometimes also through silence, sometimes putting in earplugs or putting on headphones serves this process too. But even silence is not silent. We all know that feeling of like that hiss, that like big expansive sound of silence.
So vast. I mean,
it's wild.
Yeah. I've been doing it. One of the soundscapes that I quite often use is a guided meditation. Like if I'm really like tweaked, I'll just put on a guided meditation that I love and let the voice soothe me and bring me down in the music and until I'm, back in my heart. And I would say even on my worst, most tragic romantic days when I'm just like, in pieces, there's never been a time when it hasn't worked, where I haven't come out feeling better. I might not be feeling best, but like always raises my resonance and returns me to the heart. And one of the things, a meditation I've done quite a lot over the last couple of years, there's this place where they guide you into the silence. And every time, the minute I get there, it's like my understanding just goes like global, and all of things that have been messing with my head like just all come in. And I always wish like I had a podcast recorder in my meditation, because my understanding is so vast and I can never quite bring all of it back. And I'm like, okay, every time I'll bring a bit more, I guess, but it's in the silence that I have found that the vastness of who I am versus, the little me that gets stuck into blame and the, the patterns.
That's right. That's amazing. I love it. So there's a softening and an opening that occurs.
Yeah.
And in every case, this is the movement of the heart. This is a story of, the heart's path continually softening and opening, which, by the way, feels like the most terrifying and vulnerable act.
Yes.
And yet this is the answer in every case. And every body key, every one of the 7 body keys is some version of accessing that moment of softening and opening. And that's what it is. It's a release of tension and a reopening to life.
Yeah.
It really doesn't matter which of the stuckness patterns you're dealing with. It also really doesn't matter which of the body keys you're applying. All that matters is that whatever you're doing, you're leaning back into that space of openness by any means possible.
I love it that we're unpacking this and talking about it. I did not think there would be as much in it as there already has been in the few minutes we've been talking. And when I now reflect on it in terms of my own life in the past few years, I mean, my personal disruption has been pretty nonstop and intense over the last 3 years. And, I have been resisting my destiny slightly. And when I came here to Lebanon, which, is a country, I kind of feel like quite in the eye of the storm here in terms of the potential levels of destruction, around me. And all of a sudden I kind of just sat with the melancholy. I mean, I'm in a secret garden, really. I'm in a beautifully kept garden. There's 24 villas, and it's this beautifully kept garden that's been kept for 15 years with no one living here, really. So it's this kind of strange metaphor, and we've brought life to it. We're the first people to ever live here for a full year. People come in the summer, but nobody lives year round. And so, especially in the winter, I did find myself in a lot of melancholy. There was nobody else here. And for the first time in my life, and interesting that it was actually, before I even met you, but I felt very attracted to your work when I did meet you. I really just sat with it. And I have this beautiful view of a garden out my window, and my window is floor to ceiling. So I just would stare out into nature, or go up the mountain. And out of that has come this book, which I recently sent you, about our current times, and about really learning to exactly let go of all our old patterns, and to let the conversation with the divine become more present. So, we have to remember we're living on like 5% of our mental capacity still, compared to what scientists know about our brains. So imagine if we were living at 10% or 20%, like it's kind of incomprehensible to us at the moment, I think, how vast the changes is. And yet we are trying to come up with how we should change all the paradigms and how we should, evolve ourselves,
Right. Yes.
And my partner and I just really got that. We were like, we've been saying for like 20 years in our work that we need to partner with the divine and we need to like come into relationship with it. But I feel like it was the melancholy that allowed me to do that, and allowed me just to let go of my own ideas of what my life should look like. And the piece that you published on benevolence, that's why it spoke so much to me. I just feel like in that process of letting go of the should of my vision, without letting go of my vision. I love my vision, but just to
vision expands.
It expands, because suddenly it's in conversation with the universe versus trying to control the universe into a preset shape.
That's right. So beautiful. Every piece of what you just shared is so relevant to the conversation. I think it'll be relevant to literally anyone listening. And it's just so beautiful because there's optimism, again, built into this, and benevolence. The whole process does serve us. And releasing ourselves to that, in that space of trust that says, okay, I don't know. I don't get where this is going. I can't see it.
Yeah.
This is where it's at. And this is how leaps in consciousness occur. Always through a paradigm shift. If we're if we're reorganizing ourselves in relationship to what we've known, we're basically just refining old strategies and old patterns.
Right.
In order to truly progress, something new has to show up, something we've never considered before. This is a complete paradigm shift. And this actually does elevate not only our awareness, but our consciousness. The very essence of who we are radiates at a different frequency.
So true.
It's so remarkable. And it's so possible if we do allow ourselves to lean into the process. It's interesting you used winter as an example, and seasons are really built into this. If melancholy if it had an archetype of a season, it would be winter.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And you can't, you're in the midst of winter. You can't hurry spring up.
No.
You're completely out of control. You have one choice. You have the choice to, sit there and berate winter for happening, to wish it away, or you have the choice to kind of like lean into all of the beauty that expresses itself at that season, during that season.
And I actually think that's one of the reasons I've always said this. I love seasons. And, my partner is like a sun baby. He's Middle Eastern. He's like, so he loves sun. Like if it's not sunny, he's not got melancholy. He's depressed, like straight there. There's no, he just doesn't like it. Yeah. And I'm like the opposite. I want to stay in bed. I love hearing the rain, and I want to be in that melancholy. And it really brings me back to my work with Lazarus. They've always talked about the beautiful sadness that inside within the magic of beauty, which is a transcendent energy. It's an energy that allows you to transcend very elegantly.
Love that.
Is also the beautiful sadness, and that exists within that energy. And I've always kind of gone, yeah, it sounds kind of nice, but I never really grasped it. And I feel like in this conversation, I'm really understanding what that beautiful sadness is. It's the melancholy. It's like taking the richness from the past, not throwing it away, and but like letting it compost through you and just letting it be the creative impulse that comes back as spring,
Wow. And so composting, this is a new way of thinking about it, and I absolutely love it. Yes.
It's also
so beautiful.
Composting.
Yeah. Oh, that's exciting. It's all about resisting or not resisting.
Yes.
That was another thing as you were speaking, the word you used, I'm like, boom, we need to put a pin on that because this is important. When we resist anything, we suck the life out of it, and we cause ourselves to become tense. Yeah. We're the ones at war with our lives, and there's no reason for it. If we could open ourselves, and I've used this example before, but if we could open ourselves like a flute and allow life to move through us, then each of us would make some really beautiful music. And we would enjoy it, and so would others, and it would transform the quality of life. Yeah. This is the thing. This is about quality. We don't have to be miserable. Melancholy doesn't have to become depression. It's not a chronic state. It's a movement. And if we can open and allow and stop resisting, that's what we're doing when we're getting so smart about this and trying to figure it out and fix it. And even fixing it is resistance. I don't want this, so I'll get to work on it. I don't want this, so I'm going to eliminate it. I don't want. If we just quit resisting and allow this stuff to happen, it doesn't matter if it's, you're laying in bed and you're all cozied up and just letting yourself cry because it's raining outside and the tears match the season, right? Or it doesn't matter what it is, anger, any of these things. If we allow the emotion to have its life, it moves. Yeah. And on the other end of that movement is realization, one way or another, in every case, without fail.
Motion.
That's right. Oh, this is your wheelhouse. I mean, you've built your entire life's work on emotional alchemy, this emotional awareness. This is really deep stuff. And it's fun for me to realize that somehow this work that's built itself through me and the body keys is so perfectly correlated to everything that's been building itself through you.
Every hair, total chill. I really do feel that. It's a beautiful meeting. Beautiful meeting of the minds.